What's up guys, my name is Ace, and we're about 1 week into Black Ops 6 now, and initially I was planning on doing a week 1 review, but honestly, the things I like about the game haven't really changed, and I've talked about that many times already, all the things that I like about it, and therefore instead of just repeating that section over again and turning this into a review video, I'd rather just focus on the game's biggest issues as I see it at the moment. So to be clear, this is going to be a very critical video with a lot of feedback and also pointing out a lot of issues with the game. I do want to be clear up front, I'm having a really good time playing this game. I wish I had more time to play, I've been too busy making videos, but so far I'm having a blast despite all of these issues that I'm going to be talking about today. And one more quick disclaimer here, this is a pre-recorded video and a scheduled video because at the time you're watching this, I am currently moving. I know, I picked the worst possible time as a COD content creator to move, but we didn't really have much control over that. So just keep in mind, it's possible that I mentioned some things today that have already been fixed by the time this video goes up. If that's the case, I'll try my best to leave a pinned comment, but my setup is totally taken apart right now. I don't have access to it. And without further ado, let's dive into the list. And the number one biggest issue with Black Ops 6 at the moment, at least for me, is desync. And what I mean by desync is this is a connection-related issue where some games, everything feels fine. It feels like you're killing in the appropriate amount of time, you're dying in the appropriate amount of time, your enemies don't seem to have complete superhuman reaction times, and everything's fine. Whereas in many other matches, it's the opposite. It feels like you're shooting marshmallows, your enemies somehow have hardcore time to kill, but you have core time to kill when you're playing core game modes, so it feels like you're dying in like 2 bullets, even though the enemy did shoot you 5 times. It can also seem like enemies just have superhuman reaction time, but then you watch the kill cam, which you can't trust kill cams 100%, but at least for a general indication, you watch the kill cam, and what you end up seeing is that player that just killed you that seemed like a superhuman, they weren't doing anything special, they didn't even look that good, and if anything, in the kill cam, you look like an absolute bot with the slowest reaction time ever, when that's not at all what things look like on your screen. This is by far my biggest issue. It's just so incredibly frustrating to one match have everything feel great, but then the next one, with the exact same ping oftentimes, it feels like you're playing a totally different game and you just don't stand a chance. Now when it comes to this is not new for Call of Duty, and it's especially not new for Treyarch within the launch window of games. I don't know what it is about Treyarch. I love Treyarch, but there's something about how Treyarch handles their netcode or something, where desync tends to be a bigger issue in their games, especially in the launch window, compared to the other studios. And just to show that this isn't a new issue at all, let's have a listen to Little Ace from 10 years ago in my review for Black Ops 2. For the first 2 to 3 months of the game, I had the worst and most inconsistent connection experience out of all of the Call of Duty franchise. Most games I would get insta-killed while enemies were still mid-sprint. I'd clearly shoot first and on target, yet still die. And I go on to explain essentially the same issues that I'm having right now in Black Ops 6. It's so frustrating to deal with. I know it will smooth out and level out over time because it always does. And that's not to excuse it or anything, it's just pointing out that this happens very, very frequently. I don't know why it happens, I wish it didn't happen, but this is just how things tend to go. And unfortunately, in modern days, this has brought rise to a lot of myths and misconceptions. I just want to point out, since I've been seeing a huge flood of comments on my videos lately talking about skill-based damage, there is still zero in-game evidence that this exists. And especially now that we can see the exact damage that we've dealt on the scoreboard mid-game, if skill-based damage existed, it would be incredibly easy to prove without a shadow of doubt. No more I feel it exists or having to point to Skylanders patents, which aren't evidence of implementation in any game, let alone Call of Duty. If this existed, I could prove it almost immediately, and yet I can't, and I still haven't seen any proper convincing evidence that this exists, showing an actual discrepancy in damage values between accounts based on their skill level. So no, this isn't skill-based damage, but it is desync, and that doesn't make it any less frustrating. I just think if we are going to be complaining, we should be complaining about things that actually exist in the real world. Additionally, just to make sure the community's on the same page here, since I do see another myth that keeps popping up, the tick rate of the servers for COD multiplayer is not 20 hertz like many people seem to be claiming. It's not 12 hertz like people claim. It's 60 hertz, and it has been for years outside of like Ground War and Invasion. Those ones had a lower one. And also Warzone. Warzone has the lower tick rate servers. Many people state that that's also what multiplayer is using, and that's not the case. I have tested this for myself every single year. It's 60 hertz every single year and has been for quite a few years. And again, this doesn't take away from the fact that the desync sucks right now. It's just, it doesn't appear to be tied directly to the tick rate of the servers. And if we're going to be complaining about things, let's complain about the real issues instead of making things up. So that's the first section. I know, big section of the video, but that is the biggest issue with the game right now. Next up, let's talk about spawns a little bit. This is something where in my initial impressions, I said, as a domination player, I like the general spawn logic and domination. And after a week of playtime, I stand behind that when it comes to domination spawns. That's not to say that I haven't found some problem spawn points. That's not to say that spawns on the really small domination maps aren't terrible at times, especially like Babylon, for instance. Yeah, the spawns can get brutal on that because it's such a small map. But what I mean by liking the general spawn logic is they aren't flipping all over the place like we've seen with the recent style of spawn system in Call of Duty. And instead, map control exists again. If my team captures A and B, the enemy team will be spawning at C until several of my teammates push up too far and force a spawn flip, or until we actually touch their domination point and start capturing it. And it is fairly strict. You can have one player push right into the enemy spawn location without flipping, as long as they're not touching their point. And that's how domination used to work, and in my eyes, how domination absolutely should work. That was the whole point of domination back in the day, is map control. And I think many of the new gen COD players that came to the franchise with Modern Warfare 2019 and later, they're not used to that. They're used to just immediately being spawned out into a nice super safe zone, even if their team didn't earn that safe zone, or even if the other team didn't deserve to have you spawn directly behind them. And therefore, I do think that's where at least some of the domination complaints are coming from. I've seen some clips, people posting themselves pushed right into the enemy spawn location, and then they're suddenly confused that the enemy team is spawning around them. That's a great thing because it allows you to also balance the risk versus reward. If you want to get into a risky situation with potentially a lot of reward, you can do that. You can push directly into the enemy spawn point, knowing that they're going to be popping up all around you and you're likely going to get killed. But if you manage to play it right, you might really pop off and get a nice quad feed or something in there. If you don't want that high risk, you don't push into the enemy spawn point and it won't be an issue for you. And I have missed that so much over the years. Domination used to be a map control game. It is once again a map control game, and I'd love it to stay that way. Now again, I want to acknowledge there are some problem areas or problem maps when it comes to that, and I'm all for improvements to certain areas there. I just want the general logic to stay the same. Now, outside of domination, I have played a little bit more hardpoint over the past week. Yeah, hardpoint needs some work, for sure. Especially with anchoring, I just found on some situations, I would get to that anchor position nice and early, and yet the enemy team would start spawning all around me, which is frustrating and definitely needs some work. Next up, let's just rapid fire through a bunch of small issues, especially with these ones. These are things that maybe will get fixed by the time this video even goes live, at least some of them. But one of the ones that they have acknowledged, so I do expect a fix for this at some point if it's not already out. This is, if you join a game late, you auto spawn in immediately when the map loads, usually with some random class setup in your hands. And this happens before you have the ability to select your class, and in this time, while you still haven't even selected a class setup yet, you can be killed by the enemy players. So you often spawn in with one death right off the bat, which is a relatively minor annoyance because it's just one death and then you spawn in and you move on with your life, but it is an annoyance nonetheless, and it shouldn't be working that way. Next up, something you only really experience on the larger maps, but I do find to be quite frustrating, is it appears if teammates are beyond 50 meters away from you, they will not show up on the edge of your minimap anymore. And that's regardless of whether or not you're using the forward intel perk, which increases minimap coverage. And that can be a big problem when it comes to reading the big picture, reading where spawns are, reading where your teammates are in general. And interestingly, the same thing doesn't happen with the red dots of enemy players. You can see them at an infinite distance, it seems, at least in multiplayer, an infinite distance. So I do believe this is either an oversight or a bug, and I'd really like to see this get resolved. You should always see where your teammates are in relation to you on the minimap, even if they are 100 meters away and they just show up on the edge of your minimap. Next up, a little thing I've noticed as a PS5 player is I often like playing with crossplay disabled. However, especially when I'm partied up, every time the game ends, it seems like it re-enables crossplay automatically, and I have to back out, disable it again, and then search again. On a similar note, party settings don't always save, so sometimes I need to close my lobby to go do some testing to make sure nobody joins and interferes with that testing. And I've had several situations where I close the lobby and 30 seconds later, somebody joins my game, and I'm wondering what's going on. I check my settings, and it turns out my party was open, not closed. That one's quite minor and won't affect most people, but it really does affect me quite a bit. Next up, something that's not really a bug, but seems like an oversight. This is the fact that every time you spawn in, you have that little animation where you check your chamber or you're chambering around, depending on the gun. And that's an annoyance in some of the smaller regular core maps, and a huge problem in Face-Off. In fact, when I play Face-Off, I just expect at this point that several deaths throughout a game are going to happen immediately after I spawn when my gun isn't ready to be used. Even when you do the weapon swap trick to cancel this animation out, by the time you finish that, it's already too late, you're dead. This animation on spawn, in my eyes, shouldn't exist at all in the game, but at the very least, it should absolutely not be a thing in face-off game modes. After that, let's talk about the black screen bug. This is something I've been dealing with a lot over the past few days. Again, this is something they've acknowledged, so hopefully by the time this video is up, this has already been fixed. But essentially, at random it seems, when I join a game, whether that's private match or public match, there's a pretty decent chance that my screen will be black. Now when this happens, I can open up my menus, I can see the menus just fine. If I go to my graphics settings, it actually gets rid of the blackness and I can see what's going on in the background in the gameplay. But once I exit those menus, it's just totally black. And as a result, you have to just back out, and my win-loss ratio is screwed because of this, because I've had to back out of so many games because I literally can't see the gameplay. And it seems the only temporary fix that I've found at this point is to close your game entirely, reboot it, and it usually fixes it for sometimes only a game or two, and then it's back to the same issue again. So that's quite a big issue. I suspect and hope it'll be fixed by the time this video goes live, but at least at the time of recording this video, it's one of the bigger issues I'm having with the game right now. Next up, a little bug I've noticed in the game that doesn't happen too often, but when it does, it can definitely get you killed. This is that damage direction indicator that you get when you get shot, and it gives you an indicator of the direction that you're being shot from. Sometimes it seems it shows up on the complete opposite direction of where you took damage from. So it'll show up indicating that I took damage from the right, and then I'll look to the right, and then I get shot in the back, and it turns out that was the guy that was shooting me the whole time from my left. And he was the only one that dealt any damage to me. Again, this doesn't happen all the time for me, it's fairly rare, but when it happens, it's obviously frustrating because you're reacting to the information that's displayed on your screen, and that information is sometimes wrong. Next up, for another minor annoyance that I've run into with this game, this is Invincibility Frames for enemies that are using the morphine injector, which is like Last Stand, or what you're more likely to run into is if you play the Kill Order game mode, when you down the HVT player, they will be invincible for a period of time. And this is something where I thought I could feel this in the past, but I didn't have any proof of it. And I know some people were saying skill issue, this doesn't actually happen, but now I can prove it. As you can see, at this range, it takes 5 shots to down the enemy, as expected with the Compact 92. And then once they're downed, if I pause and wait for them to go down all the way, it takes 3 shots to finish them off. If, however, I'm spraying at him the entire time without missing a single bullet, I was on target the entire time here, he didn't die until the 27th bullet that I fired. And I know I'm illustrating this with the highest fire rate gun possible, but this shows that 19 bullets that were perfectly on target did 0 damage to that player because as they were dropping into that animation, they were invincible for a period of time. And this really shouldn't be a thing. There shouldn't be a character model that's alive in the game that you're unable to deal damage to, with a gun at least. It's really frustrating to run into this. I've died quite a few times to this where I know I'm on target, I'm spraying that guy down, especially the HVT and Kill Order, and it turns out I'm just wasting ammo while shooting an enemy directly. So hopefully that's something they could look into as well. I don't even mind if they have a little bit of extra health compared to what they have right now as they're in a down state. Like we saw, it only took 3 shots to finish them off once they were down instead of 5 to down them in the first place. I'd be totally fine giving them full health when they get down, so it takes 5 additional shots instead of 3 with the Compact 92. But don't give them any invincibility frames. If I am shooting him, I should be dealing damage to him. Next up, I want to touch on something that I have made a dedicated video on, but I do want to bring it up again here. This is the Recon combat specialty that gives you wall hacks as well as the high alert perk for free, and there are 0 counters to this combat specialty. There's nothing you can do to prevent an enemy from seeing you through walls and tracking you in real time through those walls, and also nothing you can do to prevent a high alert indicator when looking at those players from behind or from the side. Now, in that dedicated video, I did break down the specialty in greater detail, so if you guys want to learn more about exactly how that works and the limits of it and everything, then I will leave that video link down below. But in my eyes, this just needs some reworks, or at the very least, some counterplay should be added to this. And this just leaves us with one last general topic I wanted to point out here. This is the maps. I said this in my initial review, and I still feel the same way. I think the general map pool that we got at launch for this game is on the weaker side for Treyarch. Now, I don't despise all of these maps as much as many seem to, but I'm also just not really impressed with the maps in general. There are a few that I like quite a bit, but none of them really blow me away, and many of them I do consider to just be, like, subpar. Like, I'll play them, and they're fine, I guess, I just don't really get excited for any of the maps to pop up at this point. So at this point, all we can really hope for is some tweaking to the spawns to help the maps play a little bit better, as well as, hopefully, some better post-launch maps to fill out that pool a bit better. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for today's video on all of the main issues that I've been experiencing with Black Ops 6 within the first week or so of the game being out. Like I said, in general, especially when I'm not experiencing the desync issues, I'm having a blast with this game, despite the other issues that are present. But if they could take care of all of the issues I listed in today's video, I think we'd be in a really good place outside of the maps. And with that, I'm curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. Now that we're a week in, how are you guys feeling about Black Ops 6? Have you guys been experiencing many of the issues I outlined in today's video? And are there any other big issues you've been experiencing that I didn't mention in today's video? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed this one, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.